Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We've been watching too much TV again and can't help but notice that it's a staple of every cable news show on television, pretty much. The battle for the soul of the Republican Party. The other channels are forever inviting on some discredited neocon moron or unemployed political hack to fret about how the GOP is in a state of existential crisis. The topic isn't entirely phony. Real rifts do exist, obviously, and we cover them. But basically, in its totality, this is propaganda because it intentionally obscures a much larger and far more interesting story. The Democratic Party is transforming before our eyes. The party of Tom Foley and Tip O'Neill and even Bill Clinton is long gone. Pretty soon, the party of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer will be history, too. In its place is emerging something new, the party of Andrew Gillum. Gillum is the mayor of Tallahassee. As of last night, he's the Democratic nominee for governor of Florida. Here's some of what he believes.
We want to replace ICE with the Department of Justice, an entity that has not been tarnished in the same way as ICE has.
So again, he says you want to abolish ICE, you say you want to replace it. That's basically the same.
In the state of Florida, I also believe that health care ought to be treated like a right and not a privilege. Yeah.
Do you think the president should be impeached?
I absolutely do. I think he's already incriminated himself by interfering with the Department of Justice, firing Jim Comey, of whom I'm no fan of, but basically obstructing justice.
The state of Florida has long been considered moderate politically. It's a vital swing state, obviously, during presidential elections. Many pundits last night and today, even Democrats, have been quick to dismiss Andrew Gillum's chances this fall. He's too far out, they're saying. He's too much of an outsider. That's absurd. They have no idea what they're talking about. They were embarrassingly wrong in the last election, and they have learned precisely nothing since. Amazingly, they're still in the predictions business when they should be selling aluminum siding or doing something useful. Ignore them. Of course Andrew Gillum could win. You ought to be taking his candidacy very seriously. Candidacies like his are erupting in a lot of places right now. The man almost certain to be governor of the biggest state in the country just announced that he plans to give free health care to foreign nationals here illegally. Watch.
I did universal health care when I was mayor, fully implemented, regardless of pre-existing condition, ability to pay, and regardless of your immigration status. San Francisco is the only universal health care plan for all undocumented residents in America. I'm very proud of that, and we proved it can be done without bankrupting the city. I'd like to see that we can extend that to the rest of the state.
So you sneak into a country ignoring its laws and you get free health care in return. What a country. In New York City, meanwhile, a city councilman named Jumaane Williams is within striking distance of becoming that state's next lieutenant governor. You might recognize his name. Williams is a pretty good guy, actually. He's a frequent guest on the show. He's the one who's always calling everyone a bigot, who wants to take your guns away and throw open the borders to the world. We're not exaggerating, by the way. Check YouTube if you don't believe it. That's him. Meanwhile, in the state of Arizona, the Democratic nominee for governor, David Garcia, says he would like to erase any barrier at all between the United States and Mexico.
I want to just take a second and imagine. Let's just imagine. Just imagine. No wall. No wall in southern Arizona.
Arizona was once one of the most conservative states politically in the country. Now it's a completely different place. He could win. If enough of these candidates do win, you won't have to imagine what a borderless America might look like. It'll be the reality and just the beginning of the new reality. Consider this, a proposal from Zephyr Teachout. She's a candidate for Attorney General in the state of New York.
And as Attorney General, I will continue to speak out against ICE. I will prosecute ICE for their criminal acts.
Putting law enforcement in prison for enforcing the laws that bipartisan majorities in Congress passed. So you don't need to be a Trump partisan or a conservative Republican or some kind of wacko right-winger to worry about all of this. Any normal American ought to be deeply concerned about what the Democratic Party is in the process of becoming. A lot of Democrats are very concerned about it, not that they talk about it on television. And concerned not because the ideas are bad or good for any one specific group, but because they're bad for America overall. Christopher Harris is the president of Unhyphenated America, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Harris, thank you very much for coming on. It seems worth talking about, to me, what the Democratic Party is becoming. I think a lot of Republicans are in complete denial about what could potentially happen in the fall and about what it means. And the press, I think, has been really unhelpful in just drawing out what these candidates are running on, what they say they believe.
Oh, it is. I wouldn't even say it's what they're becoming. I think it's what they are. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to address that this is not your father's Democratic Party. This is not the Democratic Party of John F. Kennedy. This is the party of Alexandra Ocasio or Ocasio-Cortez. I mean, this is the party of Bernie Sanders. This is who they are. But here's what they are. They're also desperate. And that's why they're using things like going after candidate DeSantis and trying to say that a phrase that he used that may have been inartful in his use, but when put in the proper context, it was not racist at all. And so what they're doing, and especially because his opponent is black, they're trying to basically have they're ringing the bell. Basically, it's a Pavlovian response that they're expecting from black people in general to say, oh my God, this guy's a racist, we should try to get rid of him. But here's what's happening, Tucker. The economy's doing well. I mean, Florida has the second highest number of black-owned businesses. And it's about 251,000 black-owned businesses. And what happens is if you allow people like Mr. Gillum to get in office, here's what he wants to do. He wants to increase the corporate taxes on those black-owned businesses in general also by close to 50%. And so we need to address the things that are good for all of America.
Well, exactly. And that's kind of my frustration, is not that people disagree with me. I assume they do. But that we're having the wrong conversation. It's all a sideshow. It's all mindless.
Absolutely.
Okay, so-and-so said that. Okay, great. But here you have a candidate who's running on the idea that health care is a moral right. You have an obligation to pay for someone else's health care. Why aren't we debating that? Why aren't we fleshing out what that means? What are the implications of that? Is anybody even talking about that?
No, they're not. They've been conditioned to have a squirrel moment, you know.
Exactly.
And I have to, it's all up, right? It's squirrel, right? But I mean, one of my favorite economists, Dr. Thomas Sowell, said he has three questions that pretty much invalidates everything the left says. You know, he always asks, at what cost, compared to what, and where's your hard data? So when people like Mr. Gillum says, oh, we need to have health care for all, and going back to the tax issue, one of the things he talked about in his campaign was saying, hey, you know what, our taxes will only be 1% lower than California. Well, California's a steaming pile of mess right now. I mean, it's falling apart. They have to hire people to come and clean up urine. And you had what? You had Gavin Newsom as the mayor, and he wants to be governor. Well, basically allowing someone like Mr. Gillum to be in charge of the entire state, the third largest state in the country with the fourth largest economy, a $967 billion economy. And they want to let someone like that run the state. It's going to hurt everybody. And that's one of those things that people need to be having this conversation.
It would be nice to have a conversation about economics once in a while and not just identity, because in the end, economics affects everybody.
It affects everybody.
Amen. Mr. Harris, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tucker.
CNN is continuing to stand by a story that one of the people who sourced it says might be false. In July, CNN broke news that Donald Trump was aware of that famous meeting with the Russian lawyer inside Trump Tower before the meeting happened. This would be potentially significant. Laney Davis, the lawyer representing Michael Cohen, says he was the source for that story. And then he admitted he doesn't really know if it's true. He can't back it up. CNN says it has other sources for the story, though it hasn't revealed who they might be. Last night on this show, journalist Glenn Greenwald explained CNN's reticence to backtrack on an obviously false story.
I find it to be, and obviously this is a high bar, one of the most humiliating and scandalous moments in the entire media behavior of the Trump-Russia saga. And they don't want to admit that they lied to the world, so they can't retract the story, and they can't admit they lied, so they're just continuing to stick to what everybody knows is a lie, but not many people care because people think, a lot of people anyway, that it was done for the right political agenda.
Alan Dershowitz is an emeritus professor of law at Harvard Law School. He's the author of The Case Against Impeaching Trump, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thank you for coming on. So watching this CNN saga, and by the way, you know, lots of news organizations get stories wrong. I've gotten stories wrong. My complaint is really, first, that they're not telling us what happened, but more than that, would it be significant if the story were true? In other words, if the president knew this meeting with this Russian lawyer was about to take place, should any of us care? Does that matter? Is that illegal? Is it unethical?
Well, it's certainly not illegal. The president's certainly entitled to know about a meeting between his son and somebody who wanted to give him dirt on a candidate or who wanted to talk to him about maybe changing rules involving sanctions. Those are all, perfectly proper meetings. But CNN is in a box. I want to put the best possible light on it. Let's assume it has one or two other sources in addition to Lanny Davis, who did the right thing by coming forward and acknowledging that his story, he doesn't have any support for his story. But they can't reveal their sources. And I have two suggestions for them. Number one, that they tell us the nature of the sources without telling us the names. Are they eyewitnesses? Is it a hearsay source? Or second, that they give the source to their expert on journalism and let their expert decide whether or not they should stick with the story, or some outside expert, somebody from the Columbia School of Journalism, who could learn the name of the sources, then go talk to the sources, still keep their names confidential, and then come forward and say, there is a basis, we're standing behind CNN. They have to do something to preserve their credibility.
Well, sure. I mean, all news organizations, us, them, all of us call for transparency. That's our job. So we should provide it when asked, and they're not. So you wrote a piece recently that reminded me, anyway, that you're not, I know that you have been typecast as a Trump defender, but you're not a Trump defender. You're a liberal. And I think you've got a lot of problems with Trump. But in the piece, you made a really interesting point, I thought. You said that our system of checks and balances is out of whack because of the independent prosecutor and his investigation. Tell us what you meant.
That's absolutely right. Look, everybody's checking everybody else under the kind of Madisonian system of checks and balances that has served us so well. The courts are striking down executive orders, sometimes upholding them. Yes. The president's checking Congress. Congress, particularly if the Democrats get control, will check the presidency. But who's guarding the guardians? Who is overseeing the special counsel or other overzealous prosecutors? The courts aren't doing it. There's no process that today exists, and I suggested the appointment of a permanent group to oversee prosecutorial overreaching. It could include great former prosecutors like Robert Morgenthau, the legendary DA of New York. Right. It could include ethics experts like Stephen Gillers, the professor at Columbia, constitutional experts like Floyd Abrams, and they would have the opportunity to at least file reports about prosecutorial overreach, because today the special counsel is the only institution of government outside of our system of checks and balances.
Whoever thought that up is insane. I hope you live forever, because we need people to remind us of that. Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much.
I'm turning 80 in 2 days, so I'm on my way. Thank you.
Well, please keep going. We appreciate it.
Thank you.